Welcome to Built to Go, a van life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time it's episode 263, and we're going to talk about the concept of being in transit. It's a special state of being, and one that van lifers find themselves in a lot. We're also going to talk about what to do if your rig is rotting. And we're going to have a product review of a straw ground mat. And I have to mention some Norway, because I just got back. And wow, did I have a great time in Norway. Some of you who are listening were probably with me on this grand journey we just took. We flew to London, took a train or bus or donkey or something to Southampton, got on this way over large cruise ship, and then went to Lerwick in Scotland, and then went to Alesund in Norway, and then to Flam in Norway, and then all the way down to Zeebrugge, as I've been told it is pronounced, although maybe English speakers would think it was Zeebrugge, which is the port for Bruges, and then back to Southampton, and I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I'm still recovering, I'm still a little bit jet-lagged, but it was an awesome trip. The things we saw were amazing, and I will talk a little bit more about that in the Place to Visit segment. But first, I want to talk to you about a concept that when I first encountered it, it was a little weird. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and then talk about this concept of being in a place like not knowing where you are, and that's a state of being. This is called being in transit. And it's funny because it actually relates to this cruise we just took. So when you take a cruise like this from a port and go visit a bunch of places and then go back to the same port, you're not legally leaving the country that you left from. I mean, you are to some extent, but you're not actually going through immigration when you get to all these countries in most cases. There are exceptions, Singapore, China, but for most places that leave from the US or Europe, you are actually considered to be still in the country that you came from or where the voyage started for legal purposes. And it's called a closed loop tour. And it's an interesting way to be because it gives you some weird rights and things. Like, for example, when I took a cruise that happened to go to St. Petersburg, Russia, about 5, 7, 8 years ago. Geez, I don't even know when that was, but a place I would not go today. We were allowed to go ashore without the complicated visa that most Americans have. We did have to go through some paperwork, but we didn't have to go through the big, long process, just because we were on a closed-loop tour. And if you're in the U.S. and you're going on a closed-loop tour, even though you're visiting a whole bunch of different countries, say Mexico and other Caribbean countries, you don't need a passport. You want a passport. Get a passport, but you don't technically need it. If you're on a cruise and you're leaving from the U.S. and you're returning to the same port, there is an agreement with all these other places that a birth certificate is enough. Where you get in trouble is if something happens and you miss the ship coming back. Uh-oh, you have just illegally entered the country, basically, and you don't have a passport, and that can be difficult. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So in those tours, you are constantly in a state of being in transit. But I just mentioned that offhand because that's not actually what I'm talking about. Way back when I first went to college, I went to a school called Salem College in Salem, West Virginia. It's still there. It's changed its name many, many times. A funny little school. At the time I was going there, it only had 300 students. And they focused on students with weird majors. And my major was Boy Scouts. I kid you not. I was in the Youth Agency Administration program. But they also on campus had an historic recreation of what life was like in 18th century West Virginia with all these buildings that they'd rescued, and they called it Fort New Salem, and that is also still there. And that was very cool to me. Growing up in Salem, Mass, just to confuse things, I loved history. I grew up with history. History has always been part of my being, and I fell right in with this place, and I joined the Student Association and spent all kinds of time there. And I met a man there whose name was Noel, and interesting guy, and I guess he took a shine to me. I don't know. I wouldn't say we had any kind of relationship, but he would spend extra time with me about things, and he gave me a book. And actually, I have it on my desk right now, and that wasn't even planned. So I can do this in real time. The book he gave me was Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which I've mentioned before. But on the cover, he wrote, and it's still there in red ink, "To Jeff, it is better to travel than to arrive. Fondly, NWT." That was Noel. And he kind of wrote it like as a scribe, it was kind of fancy. Anyway, I have no idea what happened to Noel, no idea where he is now, but I still have the book and I still read it, and it still has an impact on me all these years later. But the quote had a bigger impact on me. This idea of being in transit. And I know that for me, this is a state of being that is both frustrating and yet freeing. It's interesting. I can be the most productive when I'm not anywhere, when I'm restricted by that. I've often said that freedom is a tyranny, and when you're in transit, when you're traveling from a place to a place, especially if you're not the one driving, you have this weird state of being where you're moving, you are restricted as to where you can go by whatever vehicle you're traveling in, whether it be a plane or a boat or a car or a van, it doesn't matter. You're in a space, you're fine, there's no crises, but for a set amount of time, you can't do anything else except to be where you are. You have a limited number of things you can do. And of course, these days, you can do a lot more than you ever could. I mean, I could make my podcast, for example, while I was doing this, if I could figure out how to make the sound be okay. I can watch movies, I can read books, I can play music, I can play video games. I mean, basically anything I can do on my computer, I can do in this state. But that's now. Back in the 70s, all you could really do was be there. I mean, you could read a book or you could knit or something. But you were in this state where there were very, very few things you could do. And that's wonderful. That gives you so much power. Let me explain with another example of another book. Alex Haley. Do you know that name? I'll tell you what, if you were somebody around in the 70s, you certainly knew the name Alex Haley. Alexhaley. He wrote a book called Roots. And Roots was made into a mini-series. It's where LeVar Burton first came to fame, and it was a phenomenon. It was just one of these huge cultural things that everybody watched it. Everyone had something to say about it. Alex Haley wrote that book while he was in transit. And he set himself up for that. So rather than have all the resources he would have in his office or at a library or whatever, he booked passage on a ship, and not a cruise ship. He booked passage on a cargo ship that could also carry a few passengers. And he went up into his cabin with his typewriter and wrote Roots. Now, I'm sure there were many revisions and he didn't write the entire thing on that voyage, but the point is, he was in an environment where the phone couldn't ring. He didn't have to cook, he just had to go eat. Nobody was going to knock on the door and try to sell him Avon or a new religion. He was in complete control of his limited environment. And that's the way you can be when you're in transit. Your world becomes very, very, very small. But you have a lot of control over that little world, and that can be very, very freeing. The world we live in now, my world, your world, is you have endless distractions, right? So I'm sitting here at my computer, and I'll describe it for you. I have my MacBook Pro is on a desk, and I have a bigger monitor above that so I can see the waveform as it copies itself into Hindenburg, the software I use. I also have a web browser open on top of that has my notes and a few web pages open that relate to the podcast. I have the Discord server on a different screen below that I can just monitor loosely. I don't actually need that to do the podcast, but sometimes it's handy to keep abreast. I have an email window open in case something important comes in. And then next to me I have my phone, which I have in silent mode now, but it's constantly giving me notifications of news, and there's something walking around down a Tiki Bagel Inn, and the camera's going off, and hey, maybe you should buy a new sponge football. I mean, you get it. It's endless bothering, and people who are young have grown up in this environment, and they don't really know a time when they're in complete isolation, which means they're in complete control of their environs, unless they happen to be somewhere where the internet access goes out and they're in transit. And even then, they still have stuff on their phone. So I think van lifers intuitively understand what I'm talking about. There is a real joy in being in between places. It is, for me, refreshing to have complete control over everything, and also complete responsibility. When I'm in my van, I know where everything is, I know what needs to be done, I know how to do it, I know what my resources are, and there's very little to disturb me. It's peaceful. Now I can't find that as often as I used to, even on the plane. And when I was a kid, I used to love flying on planes, and now I've done it so much that I just find it uncomfortable, sadly. And even on my flight back, I upgraded to premium economy, which was actually pretty nice. It was a good seat and had a big 4K screen. You know, the movies were not interesting. I really just wanted it all to go away. I wanted to, even the limited stuff on the plane, I just kind of wanted it to just go away so I could just be kind of in that moment. And I don't know. Maybe I'm overstating the case, maybe I'm not, but I think you know what I'm talking about here. The state of being in transit is something now to be sought after. And I know if I could go back in time and somebody clawing their way through the Oregon Trail could hear me talk, they'd slap me right in the face and said, you, what is wrong with you? You can get to Oregon in a matter of hours, and it's taking us 4 months, and half of us died of dysentery. I get it. This is a first world problem I'm talking about. But there is this just state of peace when you're not here and you're not there and you're in between and everything is under your control and you can take a moment and just think and not react. And I think those moments can be created artificially. And I'm going to think some more about that. About having no internet weekends, for example, and no electricity weekends, stuff like that. I'm not trying to take minimalism to an extreme or anything like that. I'm just thinking, there's some value there. I bet I can extract something out of it. Thanks to Mike and Robbie for helping to support this podcast, and because of their generous support, there will be no ads, and there's not going to be ads for a while, folks. You guys have been very generous, and I appreciate it. If you would like to help support this podcast, please visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And you can buy me, yes, still, a gallon of diesel until I have time to change that to something that I can use. I'm not going to go back there. Don't talk about the van. I'm sorry. Anyway, and thanks all of you who donate every month too. You guys make a real difference, and I appreciate it. Tech Talk. We are going to talk about, I don't like using this word, but it's the best analogy I can come up with, so I'm going to use it, and that is cancer. This isn't human cancer. This is the other kinds of cancer that your van or other rig can get. Rust is the most obvious one, and I'm sorry to pick on you Econoline folks, but your vehicles rust a lot. They didn't galvanize the frames or the bodies in those things, and I love the vans, but rust is a serious problem. Same is true for trailers and other RVs, but it's not rust, it's wood rot. And the problem is the thing leaks, the water gets in there and just eats the wood away, the plywood, whatever. Very similar problems, and they both have the same cure. You gotta cut it out. So for you folks new to this, if you bought an old RV or an old van and you have a rusty spot, or you have a soft spot in the floor, or there's a soft bit in the ceiling and you can kind of walk around to the roof, but don't step there, you might fall through. I'm going to tell you right now to do yourselves a favor and adopt this mantra, which is cut it out. No, seriously, you have to cut that stuff out and replace it. It's difficult, but that's what needs to be done. In my Tiki Bago, which is the 1970, I can't remember what year it is. I have to go look it up now, 72 or 73 Winnebago. Indian D22, if you must know. That thing sat for years before the guy who owned it before me bought it and turned it into kind of a rolling tiki shack. And it got a lot of damage. Water will get into your rig eventually. You have to constantly keep up on that, especially if it's an RV. And water got in and ate away the roof a bit. And the roof on those things wasn't terribly complicated. Essentially, it was a big piece of plywood covered with like a rubber membrane. And so the previous owner knew that there was no saving that, and he literally just cut the whole thing out, found the solid members on the sides, and reattached a new piece of plywood, and then laid the roof back down, and basically fixed the problem. And he was a little paranoid about it, so he actually doubled the thickness of the wood. So in the RV now, there's like this little step down, but it's fine. He fixed it. He solved the problem because he went crazy on it. I mean, and that's the thing. You have to you don't want to cut holes in your van. I get it. But if you have this rot problem, whether it be wood or metal, you have to cut like further than it looks. Like, let's say you have a hole the size of a quarter, whether it be wood or rust. You have to make that hole a lot bigger. You have to cut a hole significantly around that so there's nothing left but good metal or good wood. Believe it or not, this came up with Team Rubicon all the time. So Team Rubicon is a volunteer organization made up primarily of veterans who appears at disaster sites and helps people on their worst days. And a lot of that involves flooding. And after the floodwaters recede, Team Rubicon would go in and help folks. And there's a lot of wet drywall. And so you see the wet drywall. So let's say the water came up 4 inches, and you might think, all right, well, let's just cut those 4 inches. Well, no, you can't, because the water has gone up much more than that. It's actually, you want to cut 12 inches above the water line. So you actually, if you have a 4-inch wet part, you're going to cut 16 inches. And this is the other tip that I will leave you with after I say this. One of the things we learned in Team Rubicon was it's often better not to cut the drywall, but just to remove the whole sheet, because that's easier to replace. It actually costs less, in many cases, to replace an entire sheet of drywall than to make a patch that fits the part you cut out. And the same is true for wood. It's not as true for metal. Metal's a little different, but if you have rotten wood in your rig, look and see if you can figure out how it's constructed. What does that whole piece of wood look like? And if you can get to it, don't just remove the rotten part. Remove that entire piece of wood, put in an entirely new piece of wood, and it's probably going to be better than it was new. If you do things like, well, I'll just paint over it, or I've got this rust converter here, that'll fix. I'm telling you, that is not going to last very long. And if you're going to keep the rig for the summer and then you're going to get rid of it, okay, maybe, but you're passing on a problem to somebody else, which I don't think is very nice. And you're actually going to make the problem worse, because then you have whatever you did with that stuff to get out of there too. So anyway, word to the wise, cut it out. Product review. I bought one of these a long time ago now. Boy, probably 8 years ago. But this is the Stansport Tatami straw ground mat. It's a very exciting thing here. You may have seen these a lot at campgrounds. This is a mat that you put outside your door. And this one is 60 inches by 78 inches, so it's fairly large. And the idea is that it is a surface you can put outside that's easy to clean and will give you some protection from the ground. Now, if you put it on top of cactuses, that's not going to help. But little rocks and, uncomfortable gravel and things like that, this does offer some protection from that. And it's just a nice thing to have, that if you're going to be staying in the same spot for a few days, you have this surface you can put down, and it makes it a little bit more homey, and you can put things on it, and, it helps keep insects away to some degree. And if there's mud, it'll protect it from the mud and that kind of a thing. So, like I've said, I've had one for years. I've used it a lot, and they work great. They're not perfect. The way they fold means that if the ground isn't perfectly flat, sometimes they will kind of, stick up a bit. If you try to put them down on tall grass, they're not heavy enough to compress the grass, so the grass will push them up. And the biggest problem with them is wind, which, of course, is always a problem. So I typically staked mine down to keep it in place, and then I put a chair on it, to help. But I loved it. I mean, and the reason I'm talking in past tense is because mine just died. So over time, they get brittle, and then at some point you're going to open it up and it's just going to all fall apart. And that's what just happened to mine. So I'm in the market to buy a new one, and I found this, and I thought I would share it with you. So it's the Stansport Tatami straw ground mat, and it's not made out of straw. It's the kind of mat that could be made out of a straw, but it's actually made out of plastic. And the thing is, you fold it up and you roll it up, and it takes up about the same amount of space as a pillow. And it doesn't have to be stored inside. You can store it outside. It's waterproof. You can just toss it in the back of your truck or tie it to your ladder or whatever you want, and that's fine. They're $22. They're not the most expensive thing in the world. So if you get a few years out of it, you've done great. You can also put them in the back of your pickup truck if you just want to have something to cover the metal with, if you're going to do something back there like a quick impromptu camping trip and you just want to be off the ground. You'll find a use for it. Why use this instead of a tarp? Well, it has more substance to it than a tarp. It's got a little bit of structure. And while a tarp could work, this thing just feels more strong. Strong is not the right word. It feels more substantial. And it's woven in such a way that if it gets sand on it, the sand will fall through. So it's a little bit more like a carpet than a tarp. A tarp you could use too. I mean, I'm not telling you what to do, but take a look at this thing and see if it will fit with you. Of course, I have a link in the show notes, and you can pick all kinds of colors and different sizes and such. Tales from the road. So way back when I was young and stupid, that was like yesterday, right? No. I mean, forget that. I don't know that I'm going to outgrow stupid, but I am going to outgrow young. I was in Las Vegas. I'd lived there for a brief time, and while I lived there, I had a Land Rover. It was a Land Rover Discovery Series 2, a 2004, which, if you know anything about these, was a special year because that was the year that came with the center diff lock. And that vehicle, even though it's not a real Land Rover, was a beast off-road. It had front and rear differentials that locked and a center differential that locked, and it was full-time four-wheel drive. And you could shift into low. I mean, that thing, that was built for off-road. I understand everyone's got opinions about these things. I agree with most of them. But driving off-road, this thing could do. It was even kind of clever. It had, the differentials were not in the middle. Like if you look at a Jeep, the differentials are between the wheels. Not in a Land Rover, at least of this type. The differentials were offset, which gave you a bigger area between the wheels that you could use to avoid rocks. And for mine, all I had to do was center the rock where my body was in the vehicle, and then I would miss the differential. There were a lot of little things like that that made this vehicle really, really good off-road. Unfortunately, when you have a vehicle that's decent off-road, it's easy to be an idiot. And a way to be an idiot with an off-road vehicle is to go out on a trail that you've never been on before, that's deep in the desert, in a place very close to Death Valley, and go alone. And even worse, do it in the afternoon. And that's exactly what I did. So I went up to Red Rocks, which is a lovely place to visit just right nearby Las Vegas. I mean, if you have an afternoon to kill in Vegas and you're sick of all the lights and glitz and you can rent a car, go up to Red Rocks and just drive around a bit. It is beautiful. And there's all kinds of stuff to see there. One of the things there, though, is an exit. And it's an exit onto an off-road trail that basically climbs you out of the Great Basin. You're right on the edge there. So it's pretty cool. And I saw this on the map, and I thought, I've got a Land Rover. I might as well just go do this. And I did. I went up to Red Rocks, and then just went up there. The entire time I did this journey, I did not see another vehicle. And I imagine that if I had gotten really, really stuck, I wouldn't have had to wait days to see another vehicle. Well, at least not too many. It's a fairly popular trail. Nonetheless, this is dumb. You should not do this. Off-roading by yourself is inherently dangerous, especially under the conditions I just described. There are more dangerous conditions for sure. This was not the worst. If I had to, I probably could walk back into the park, no matter how many miles it was, but still. This is dumb. If you're wondering where this was, it's called Rocky Gap. And it starts off in the Calico Basin and crawls over, and you end up by Mountain Springs. It's a good ride. It's a lovely ride. Just do it right. Don't do like I did. And here's why. You remember I was telling you about the differential and how smart it was in the Land Rover. Well, I'm fairly confident. I'd actually gone to Land Rover driving school. I knew how to use the vehicle, and I wasn't too worried about rocks. And there was a big rock in the way. This is a serious off-road trail. Don't try to do this in a rental car. And you have to kind of put your wheels up on one side and be crooked a bit and go over this boulder, which was fine. I did that. But then somehow I miscalculated, or the rock was wet and I didn't know it. I don't know what happened, but the vehicle slipped and I fell off, and the rear differential landed hard on the boulder. That's not good. You don't ever want that to happen. I was like, uh-oh. So I turned everything off. I went out and crawled under, and I could see that the differential was sitting hard on that boulder, but fortunately it didn't look damaged. There were no cracks, there was no liquid. Now in a Land Rover, even if that thing had gotten destroyed, I could have still driven it, but still, that was an expensive thing, and I certainly didn't want any damage. So I was like, whew, okay, fine. I'm fine. All I have to do is drive out of here. So I get back in, start the engine, step on the gas, and the engine revs up, but the vehicle doesn't go anywhere. Now I can hear the front wheels kind of digging a little bit, but I'm not moving. I'm like, okay, this is bad. So I get out and look, and yeah, I had high centered the vehicle, even though the differential wasn't centered. It was sitting up enough that the back wheels couldn't get any purchase, and the weight of the vehicle, which was quite heavy, on that boulder was preventing the front wheels from having enough power to pull it off. Now, I'm by myself, unprepared, don't have a winch, don't have tow straps, don't have a farmer's jack, one of those big, huge jacks that they use. I had nothing. I had what came with the vehicle. So what did I do? How did I get out of this? Before I answer, take a moment and think what you would do. You've got a Land Rover, stock from the showroom, not modified in any way. Or you pick any vehicle you want, it doesn't matter. Your vehicle is sitting on its differential on a rock. The wheels are not gaining purchase. There's no help coming. You have to get out of this, or you have to wait a long time or walk a long time. What would you do? Well, I thought about the problem, and I thought about the physics of the problem, and I realized that the problem was the vehicle was sitting on this rock, and the wheels were not touching the ground. So then in my head, I see all these like math symbols, but I'm like, so which of those two things can I fix? The vehicle is on I can't pick the vehicle up. Wait a minute. Test your assumptions. I can't pick the vehicle up. Yes, I can. I can pick the vehicle up. I have a jack. The thing came with a jack. No, it's not one of those fancy off-road jacks, but it's a jack. I was like, okay, so I can jack the vehicle up. Now, to jack it up enough to get it off that boulder, well, then I could kind of drive forward. The jack would fall, and I might damage the jack, but that might be worth it. Or if I screw that up, the boulder could hit another part. Wasn't sure that was the right answer, but I was like, okay, well, I could do that. And then I looked at the other part of the problem, the wheels not touching the ground. And then I realized I had another resource that I hadn't considered. Boulders. I was in a field of boulders. It looked like a dry wash. It probably was a dry wash. But there's boulders everywhere. And after some time in thinking, I realized that all I needed to do was jack up the rear wheels and put boulders under them and basically build myself a ramp so I could get off of there. And that's exactly what I did. I jacked up one side, and I remember the jack wasn't big enough, and I had to put a boulder under the jack. This is dangerous, by the way. I'm not recommending you do this. I didn't have wheel chocks. Yes, I used boulders. I didn't have anything to prevent this thing from falling on me. This is not a good situation. But it worked. I jacked it up, let that rear wheel come down on a pile of boulders that ramped down, and did the same thing on the other side. And with that wheel up in the air then, when I jacked up the other side, which was hard because the jack was really lifting near its capacity, the differential rose off the boulder. I only needed an inch. I put some rocks on the other side. I threw the jack in the back. I did not put anything away because I was like, I might need this again. And gently rolled down the ramp I'd made, and I was good to go. I'd solved the problem, no permanent damage to the vehicle. I tell that story for two reasons. One, don't be dumb. Don't do that. It's not a smart thing to do. And number two, when you get yourself in these situations, you need to check your resources and your assumptions. Just had an incident on this trip that I took, very, very, very different, but I had a problem that looked like it couldn't be solved. So I looked at my resources and my assumptions, and I found that some of my assumptions could be overcome, and I was able to fix it, and that was the same thing here. So if you ever find yourself in a situation that you think you're stuck, take it apart. Take the whole thing apart. Don't look at the big problem. Look at the little problems. Look at the details. What's stopping you from going? What resources do you have? Not those resources. Find some other resources. Continually question every single fact you come up with. You may be actually stuck and there's nothing you can do about it. But I think a lot of people actually have the way to overcome their problems if they would just think about it in a lateral way. Even if your vehicle's moving lateral, which mine did in this case. A place to visit. Okay. Norway. That's it. Good night. Hey, thank you for listening. No, Norway is van life paradise as far as I can tell. There's a lot of van life paradise, but someone in the Discord channel, and you know who you are, thank you very much for listening, recently did an entire big long trip through Norway, and they were sharing bits of it with me because they knew I was going to Norway. And I was amazed. They spent a lot of time there, and holy cow, now I know why. Now, I only went to two places in Norway, and I went there by ship. The first was Alesund, which is an interesting city. It's a city. It's a small city, and I had a friend who I'd never met, because that's how life is these days, pick me up and take me up into the mountains and show me how beautiful Norway was, and it was amazing. And that alone made me think that Norway was a special place I wanted to spend more time in. But it was when I got to Flam that I really realized that this is an overlooked place in the world, especially for van lifers. We were in the ocean. I know that's not surprising. But Flam is not in the ocean. Flam is inland. It's almost in the middle of Norway. Now, normally, if you're going to go to an inland city from the ocean, you will go up a river. We didn't go up a river. We went up a fjord. Well, Jeff, that's just the Norwegian word for river. And no, fjords are very, very different. Fjords are at sea level, right? So when you go up a river, you're actually gaining altitude. That's why the river flows down. Fjords don't flow. I mean, they might a little bit because there's stuff feeding into them. But essentially, it's just a long, narrow channel from the ocean to the city. And the one leading to Flam is unbelievable. So first, I had an experience on a ship that you can't have from land. It was it blew my mind. I let out a whole lot of expletives simply by looking out the window. If you've been to Alaska and the Inside Passage, as impressive as that is, and it is, Norway is like that, but times 10. And I don't mean the experience, I mean the height. It's not even the height, it's the steepness. It's so very, very steep. It's otherworldly. So we did this for hours, and I happened to have a cabin on the back of the ship, so I had an unimpeded view of all this as the ship went through. Blew my mind. But then we got to Flam, which was at the end of this fjord, and it took hours and hours to get there. Beautiful little town of 350 people that we were completely dwarfing with the 6,200 people on our ship. I have things to say about this, but it was just amazing. And then there was the little touristy area, and then there's a train that goes up in the mountains, and you get to see incredible waterfalls. So much power, so much water. Like, imagine Niagara Falls compressed into 300 feet and all the same water. I mean, just the kind of water that if you ever fell in there, not only would you die, no one would ever find any trace of you because it would be obliterated. All right, I'm getting a little superlative here, I think. Maybe not. But the reason I'm telling you all about this is because Behind the touristy area, there was a parking lot. And in the parking lot were camper vans, a good number of them. And in Europe, it's really easy to figure out where a camper van is from because their license plates are labeled with the country they're from. Just like in the States, you can see what state they're from. They were from Poland and Germany and a few other places. And I looked at the map and holy cow, these people had driven a long place to be there. But they had driven there in Norway. So there's nothing I can say to explain why Norway is just camping paradise, except that, like a few other places on the earth, everywhere you look is a picture postcard. But not only that, it's jaw-dropping. I've been all over the world. Not quite, but I've seen a lot of the world. Norway is exceptional. It is green. It is tall. And in the summer, the sun does not go down. It gets a little bit dim at 2 o'clock in the morning, but that's it. The people are super friendly. Everything is super clean and efficient. And I instantly fell in love with Norway. And you will too, should you ever go there. A couple of notes. It is not an inexpensive place. Because of the way Norway is shaped, a lot of these places are actually kind of an island culture because they're cut off for everything. There was one point at which we had stopped at an overlook, and there was a house across, which I later learned was a fjord. I would have guessed it was a river, but it was a fjord. And, you could see people on the porch. It wasn't that far away. And I thought, well, that's interesting. How do you get there? And my friend said, that's a 7-hour drive. It's 7 hours just to get over there because of the way the country is. And they apparently have no problem with camper vans because they were everywhere. So if you happen to be fortunate enough to be in Europe and you have time and you can get up to Northern Europe and go to Norway, definitely a summer trip unless you are prepared. Do it. It is one of these places that if you are jaded about travel, I've seen it all, you will be disabused of that notion instantly. And I have to stop talking about it now because I will just get more and more excited. By the way, just as a side note, we did have a Norwegian blue with us, and I can say that that particular Norwegian blue is no longer pining for the fjords. Resource recommendation. This is a video. Just a video. It's by a gentleman by the name of Chris Boden, and it's called Be Weird. And I would like you to watch this video. It's not that long. It's a very simple video. The gentleman in the video is masking off his car so he can paint it, and he's talking to the camera while he does it. It's not a car video. It's not about painting, although he does mention these things. It's a video about life. And it's R-rated. If you're easily offended by jokes about genitals, for example, or swear words, don't watch this. It's okay. But if you can get past that, this guy's message is dead on, and it applies to van life, especially for folks who are thinking, oh, my family doesn't really think that living in a van is a good way to be, and you're kind of like a homeless person, but like not really, and then I don't want to be a weird... Okay. Remember what I said the name of the video was? Be Weird. If you want permission to be yourself, if you want permission to be who you know you are, but you feel like society is preventing you from getting there or someone's judgment is stopping you, watch this video and you might feel differently afterwards. Because Chris had a big long time in his life where he was quote unquote in transit. Except he wasn't in transit. He was in jail. But you know what? It's almost the same thing, in a way. Not really in a way. It's the same situation in that you can only control a very small amount of your environs, but nobody's going to bother you. That's all I'm going to say. There's a link in the show notes. If you want to search for it yourself, the name of the video is Be Weird, and the gentleman's name is Chris Boden. Boden. Give it a watch. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to episode 263. I apologize for the weird schedule lately. I'm in the busiest few weeks of my life right now, and they're almost done. Almost. All I have to do is survive the Bermuda Triangle next weekend, and all will be good. Music, as always, is by Simon Wegg. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, I am jeff@builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And until next time, remember the words of Chris Boden, who said, "You cannot keep everyone else warm by setting yourself on fire."